Welcome to Batya on NewsNation. I am Batya Ungar-Sargon, and we begin with what we learned about America this week. It's 2016 all over again. Once again, hardworking Americans are being called racist for objecting to having their generosity taken advantage of by overwhelming waves of immigrants. Over the weekend, the New York Times revealed that a massive fraud had taken place in Minnesota's Somali community, posing as charitable NGOs feeding the hungry or protecting the homeless or servicing autistic kids. Nearly 90 Somalis have been charged with embezzling up to $1 billion in government funding dispersed during the COVID pandemic. No children were fed, no homeless were housed. The money was spent instead on luxury cars, mansions, and real estate overseas. And when officials from the Department of Education tried to investigate, the Somali criminals threatened to sue and call them racist in stories that would be sprawled across the news. Can you even imagine being gifted the greatest privilege on earth, the gift of American citizenship, and then turning around and throwing that generosity back in our faces, stealing from the very people who gave you that gift? It is galling. And yet, the liberal cable news channels refused to even cover the story until they could make the Somalis the victims of it all, something that President Trump's comments on the story gave them the opportunity to do.
Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay? Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks. We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country.
The outrage that the president is giving voice to is completely justified. And focusing on his linguistic choices rather than the actual fraud is just a smokescreen for those complicit in it. It's exactly the kind of gaslighting that got Trump elected in the first and second place. For years, Americans who've been upset about the massive pressure mass migration put on their lives were called racist for wanting their government to think about what's best for America's children before thinking about everybody else's. For years, the liberal media called them racist, a basket of deplorables, xenophobic nativists, and haters for the crime of opposing their own disinheritance. Unbelievably wealthy pundits and Democratic politicians went on cable news and called working-class folks struggling to make it by working 3 jobs racists for thinking that maybe if the labor market was tighter, they wouldn't have to choose between chicken for dinner and soccer practice for their kids. Maybe if the government hadn't plonked 80,000 migrants into their town, housing wouldn't be as prohibitive. And those factory jobs, well, maybe they would be theirs. It's the immigrants who are the victims, the liberal elites insisted, and then went on to hire those immigrants to clean their homes and watch their kids and mow their lawns, paying them much less than they would have had to pay an American. The outrageous, massive fraud perpetrated by members of Minnesota's Somali community is this exact scenario on steroids. They literally threatened to call Minnesotans racist if they dared to object to being stolen from. But to the left, the only outrage is how Trump talked about the scandal. That's what we learned about America this week. The elites have learned nothing. Donald Trump won the presidency twice by telling the American people, you're not bad for wanting the most basic version of the American dream for yourself and your children. This is your country. You come first. The Democrats will never win back the working class until they can bring themselves to choke out some version of this message and maybe even actually believe it. Joining me now, I'm so thrilled to have Dan Turrentine, Sean Spicer, and Rachel Bade. They are co-hosts of a new and incredible show called The Huddle. It just launched. I have not yet missed an episode. It is so good. Thank you all so much for being here with me.
Thank you, Batya.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's start with you, Dan. Reaction to my monologue.
Oh, Batya, you're spot on so much of it. It's the worst stereotype of the Democratic Party. You have massive fraud, as you said here just now, when it was discovered. And the good news is it was caught pretty early. They said, hey, if you go public with this, we're going to call you racist. And then lastly, the Walz administration, it sounds like the governor, maybe even himself, said, these are important voters to us. So, hey, we got to be careful here because we need them coming up in our races. It's everything people hate about the Democratic Party. And as someone who wants us to win elections, it makes my blood boil.
So, Sean, the Walls piece, you have the Ilhan Omar piece. She held parties at one of the restaurants that was implicated in this fraud. What do you think is going to be the reaction to this from voters? Do you think that this puts the Republicans in a better position?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about the huddle. Anyone who wants to sign up can always go to the DChuddle.com, and we'll keep you in the loop as we do it every morning, 8:30 a.m. But I appreciate your constant and continued support for our efforts. So thank you for your kind words. Look, as Dan said, this is just sort of a gift. The question is whether we'll accept it or not, right? The Republican Party sometimes, the Democrats put the ball on the tee, and then we turn away and say, hey, look, there's popcorn for sale. And so we walk away. I just wonder, look, this has all the makings, right? Tim Walz, this is $1 billion of COVID funds that was supposed to be going to children. You can't get better than that, right? And Walz knew about it. There are 400 employees, part of his Department of Human Services, that say that he stood in the way of calling it out, that he reprimanded whistleblowers. And then, as Dan said, then he said, well, we can't come down on these people because they're voters. It's $1 billion of taxpayer funds that were supposed to help kids. And Ilhan Omar says, you know what? Sometimes when programs like that get instituted quickly, things happen. This isn't things happen like you ordered too many pencils by mistake or you forgot to shut the window on the way out the office store. This is $1 billion, and they go, yeah, you know what? It happens. What do you think was going to happen? And I think that exemplifies the Republican message of why big government has problems, how the Democrats treat tax dollars and turning a blind eye to fraud. So the question is, I think, they served us the ball. Can we return it?
Rachel, you are one of the best sourced journalists in America. What is the scuttlebutt on the Democrats?
No pressure.
Are you hearing anything? Are there any Democrats who understand not just that this is very bad, but that in a way it implicates a lot of the larger problems with how they look at immigration, how they seem to be siding constantly with the immigrants, with the criminal immigrants, but also just with the idea that we should have massive amounts of immigration while working class Americans see that as really undercutting their wages and their American dream?
Batya, if Democrats were smart, they would actually seize on this. They would use this opportunity to say to voters, look, we can call out when something bad is happening, even if it's a minority community. We don't need to be afraid of that. You're not seeing stuff like that happen here in Washington, D.C. I mean, look, you have government workers in Minnesota calling out their own governor saying he is, quote, dishonest. He, quote, lacks ethics. He has misused his leadership, that he punished whistleblowers and even their families for bringing up this fraud scandal. If I'm a moderate Democrat in a swing district, or even a Democratic candidate running in a district where, the Republican might be a little vulnerable, I'm gonna seize on this story. I'm gonna say this is unacceptable. Walz should have done something and sort of decry his leadership. Except you're not hearing that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And in Middle America, again, that's a big missed opportunity for those Democrats, Batya.
So this was a bad story for the Democrats, but we also had this week some sort of good news for the Democrats. We had the Tennessee special election. In a district, Tennessee 7th, that was a Trump plus 22 district, meaning Trump won this district by 22 points. This was a year ago, right? And now you had, look at this result. So Afton Bain, who was the Democrat, she came within 8 points of winning. There were polls that had her down by just 2 points. It turns out she lost by much more than that. But still, I mean, looking at this has to be giving Democrats a sense that they're things are going in the right direction for them. It has a lot of people looking at this, comparing it and combining it with the victories in New Jersey and in Virginia, and saying that really we're kind of sitting on the cusp of a blue wave. Dan, where are you on the blue wave narrative? Do you think this is wish casting, or are we kind of headed in that direction?
I think as we head into 2026, Democrats are cautiously optimistic. Going into this year, there were about 20 Republican seats where the Republican had won in 2024 by 7 points or less. So both parties identified, hey, those are vulnerable members. Right now, what you're seeing is about a 13 to 15% overperformance by Democrats. If that number holds, another about 20 Republicans come on the board. If you want to win the majority, it's much easier to do if you have 40 targets than only 20 targets. And so that's going to impact candidate recruitment, fundraising. It's a virtuous cycle of momentum that can build that's hard to stop if you're the Republicans.
So, Sean, tell me if you think this is wish casting. I think that this narrative about a blue wave is a little overblown because I think that what we're seeing here really is the fruits of the political realignment. So the Democrats used to represent labor and the Republicans represented sort of the country club wealthy Americans. It's now the opposite. Most wealthy Americans are now Democrats and most working class Americans are now Republicans. And the thing about rich people is they show up even on off-year elections. They're much more engaged politically. And so what we're really seeing here is that the Democrats now, because they represent the wealthy and the educated, have a built-in advantage, something that the GOP really needs to start to understand if they want to stay competitive. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a little bit more than that, right? Republicans right now have a low propensity voter problem, meaning that there are people that will go out and walk over hot coals stuffed with Legos to vote for Donald Trump, but won't do it for anybody else. And then, and so that has to get figured out. Two, we have a communication problem, right? The Republican political establishment is built around campaigns that raise a boatload of cash and spend it in the last 6 weeks on broadcast television and cable. That model is broken. Consultants get paid under that model, by the way, 10 to 15% of the buy, and that's why they urge them to continue it. But we've got to remember that most working Americans don't stay attuned in that same way. 365, you know, not just the last 6 weeks. We've got to be talking to people 365, 7 days a week, and also in places that they don't go. We've got to be reaching out to independent media. We've got to be playing an influencer game, much more than that. The big lesson from this election is like going to the doctor and the doctor says, look, you're not sick yet. It's not that bad. But if you don't make some lifestyle changes, you're going to have some big problems very soon. And so you go back and you course correct. And I hope that what most House Republicans realize is we caught a break in Tennessee. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. It wasn't as good. Afton Bain was a horrible, horrible, horrible candidate. Democrats will tell you that she was the fourth of four choices that they wanted to come out of that Democratic primary. That being said, we need to make sure that we are prepared for that. And hopefully, and I believe it will happen, the economy in July, August of next year, with all these investments that President Trump is bringing back to America, will come to fruition. As long as the economy is good in July, August of next year, we're in good shape. But tell me what that economy looks like, and I'll tell you who wins.
Rachel, are you a blue wave skeptic, or do you see this coming?
Look, I think the analogy that Sean just gave about the doctor and the warning, it's spot on right now. Any Republicans that are looking at Tuesday's results and saying, oh, we're going to be fine, they're ignoring blaring red warning signs. I mean, Affton Bain saying that rioting is an acceptable form of protest, bragging that she, has bullied ICE officials, saying she hates Nashville and country music in Nashville. It just, the fact that she even came 9 points close to the Republican, to Matt Van Epps, is shocking. Look, I just got off the phone with a pretty senior Republican campaign official, and what this person said to me, he was very blunt about it. He said, Republicans right now are rudderless. They feel like the president and their leadership didn't go out and sell the big, beautiful bill to the country. They're concerned that they're going to get blamed for premiums going up at the end of the year if that happens. And they're concerned about what voters are feeling right now about affordability. And you have the president out there saying things like affordability is just this con. So look, privately, Republicans, they might not all admit it publicly, but there's a lot of concern and a lot of griping. And I think you're starting to see that on Capitol Hill when you have lawmakers like Elise Stefanik, who is in Republican leadership, coming out and taking shots at the Speaker of the House, saying that he would not have the votes to be Speaker anymore. I mean, these people, they're not happy right now, and I think they're sensing that a blue wave is building, and they're really concerned about what do we do to stop it. So they do need to wake up and do something soon, Batya.
So this big question
Batya,
about...
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, to Rachel's point, I mean, Republicans need to understand the New England Patriots just played a Pop Warner football team and won by a touchdown. Yes, it's a victory. Affton Bain was a massively flawed candidate, and I think Rachel's spot on. To walk away with this and say, hey, we won by 9 as some kind of victory dance is misreading the room real big.
Rachel, I wanted to ask you about the healthcare subsidies, this big fight that's coming down the pike to where the Republicans are going to have to decide whether they extend these subsidies or not. Very early on in the shutdown, you had some incredible reporting that President Trump was suggesting that he was actually interested in finding some common ground with the Democrats over healthcare, that he does understand that this is important. Can you tell us a little bit about that reporting and where that stands right now?
Yeah, it was one of the first days of the shutdown, and the president had met with the Democratic leaders. And the anecdote that I had heard was that he said to them, look, I want to make a health care deal. And it went against everything Republican leaders were saying on the Hill at that point, which is, don't give an inch to the terrorists. We do not negotiate during a shutdown. But the reality is that the president, he's not an ideologue the way that a lot of these Republicans on Capitol Hill are. Like he doesn't like Obamacare. He thinks that the system is broken, it doesn't work, and that they need to replace it, like pretty much all Republicans feel as well. But look, he doesn't want premiums to go up on his watch either. We saw this over the summer, that he's very sensitive to allegations that he is in any way, hurting these voters, these lower income voters, taking away benefits in particular. We saw that over the Medicaid fight this summer. And look, I think that's why you could potentially see him sweep in and put pressure on Republicans on Capitol Hill to do something. I just don't know if they're going to listen. I talked to Republican leaders, and it's like worse than trying to get a 3-year-old to eat broccoli, as I wrote this week in my newsletter. Like, Republican leaders are saying they do not want to do this. And Sean has been talking on our show all week about how at some point he thinks the president will lean in and tell him, plug your nose, swallow, you got to do this, because otherwise there goes the midterms. If premiums go up, guess who's going to get blamed? The party in power, Batya.
Yeah, I do have to say that a lot of Republican lawmakers seem to be still having this muscle memory of we have to protect the rich, whereas Donald Trump really understands that it's the paycheck-to-paycheck American who is his base. Dan Turntine, Sean Spicer, Rachel Bade, co-hosts of The Huddle, thank you all so much for joining me. God bless you all, and come back very soon.
Thank you, Batya.
We will.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up, alleged healthcare CEO murderer Luigi Mangione is back in court this week. His supporters hailing him as a hero and raising money for his legal fight. Jillian Michaels with her take. Luigi Mangione was in court this week for a hearing ahead of his trial for the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson exactly 1 year ago. Thompson was shot in the back in cold blood, and 5 days later, Mangione was arrested after a nationwide manhunt. In a horrible twist, Mangione has become a folk hero with a devoted cult following who contribute to his legal fund and send him thousands of letters in prison. It's not that they think he's innocent. His supporters claim that he is a hero for taking out one of the people responsible for our disastrous healthcare system, a person who spent his life denying the healthcare claims of sick Americans, destroying their lives when they were at their most vulnerable. But if Brian Thompson is evil for not saving lives, how is Mangione any better for taking one? It's certainly true that our healthcare system is an affront to human morals. People pay thousands and thousands of dollars for terrible care, only to have their claims denied by AI bots designed by executives to destroy lives. That's all true. But the ghouls supporting Mangione would do well to realize that it is because human life is infinitely precious that our healthcare system is so disgusting. A logic that equally condemns cold-blooded killers like their icon. Here to discuss is the great Jillian Michaels. Jillian, thank you so much for joining me. So what was your reaction to the killing, and what is your reaction to this cult of support around Luigi Mangione?
Well, of course, I'm with you 100%. Violence is never the answer or the solution. Vigilante justice is unacceptable. But I do think that it is unquestionably a referendum on the way Americans are feeling about the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to discuss here if you do want to look at it. This guy, Brian Thompson, he wasn't a good guy. It does not by any means justify his murder at all, of course not. But at the time that he was murdered, UnitedHealthcare was under investigation, secret DOJ investigation, for just a few things that I listed out for you here. So consolidating power by buying up doctors' practices, inflating billing for Medicare. So basically our tax dollars, they're upcoding people's diseases so that they could take our tax money. They could basically rob us and rip us off, inflating Medicare billing. And the long story short is Brian knew this. Other higher ups at UnitedHealthcare knew this, and they dumped the stock, actually. And then it wiped out pension funds for firefighters, for example. Like, the corruption is just next level. So we could go on and on. I've got a lot for you here. I want to shut up so you can talk. But the long story short is you can see why people who are not mentally well, but nevertheless would argue that this guy's kind of a hero because they feel that he brought justice that's never served.
Yeah, I mean, I think the correct position is that the corruption is disgusting. Anybody who enables it is deeply immoral, and that includes every politician who's doing nothing about it. But also, you don't then lionize a cold-blooded killer, because it's not really just about Brian Thompson. It's about an entire system that is designed to protect these cartels.
Oh, unquestionably. And if you look at what he wrote on the bullets, I think it was Deny, Delay, Obstruct, which is actually a book title that talks all about the ways in which insurance companies literally kill the American people by denying desperately needed insurance claims. But you go back to the point. I'll say it again. God forbid I get clipped. It's absolutely wrong what Luigi Mangione did to Brian Thompson. But I wonder if some good can come out of this by allowing some of this darkness in the system to come to light.
So how do we actually fix it? I mean, I think this is a huge political fight right now. Yeah. You have the Obamacare subsidies set to expire. On the one hand, you don't want to leave people without health care or having to pay thousands more dollars to this terrible system. But on the other hand, you don't want to keep giving money, spending, good money after bad, enabling the raising of prices, enabling this denial of claims. So what is the answer in your view?
In my view, I'm sorry to be so familiar with you. In my view, Batya, I think that we have to take personal agency. I think it's the only true effective rebellion. Obviously, I've had very high hopes for Maha that there would be change when it comes to big ag, big food, big pharma, big insurance. And there has been incremental progress, but these are the 4 biggest lobbies in the world, literally. And when they're all coming down on these politicians simultaneously, and the system is relatively rigged with Citizens United, they donate to these guys' campaigns. And if the politicians don't do what they want, they primary them. So the bottom line is we do have to take this into our own hands. And I would say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I know you're looking for policy solutions, but I don't know if we'll ever see them. I could give you all the greatest ideas in the world, but do they ever happen in Washington? Probably not, for all the reasons just mentioned.
I'm not against personal responsibility, of course, but to me, I think the reason that the healthcare system, as this kind of for-profit situation that we have here, is so morally repugnant to me is because we cannot choose our health outcomes. So much of this is an act of God. So much of it is, beyond our control. So what would you say to Americans who are just really struggling? I mean, to me, I don't understand why the government isn't allowed to just put a cap on premiums for any insurance company that accepts taxpayer dollars. Like, it seems very obvious, and yet I think you're right. There's no politician I could point to who would actually do that.
There you go. I mean, you just said it. You and I could come up with great ideas all day long, all day long, but they're not going to pass them. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is we have to actually take our care into our own hands. I strongly suggest that your listeners go check out the work of a guy named Brigham Bueller, who is an industry insider that exposed all kinds of corruption with pharma and insurance, and he gives solutions on pay models. I know this sounds overwhelming, but basically you do your own blood work. It's $500. You do it once a year. You have an expert look at your blood panel and advise you. You have major medical for when you, God forbid, get diagnosed with something like cancer or you're in a life-changing car accident, and you save all of this money that they never reimburse you to manage your care with pay models. And he's got a really good plan for people if, in fact, they're looking to take agency, because this traditional way, Batya, I don't know. It's not working, and I don't know if it will ever work.
Jillian, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is under fire from the legacy media over the boat strikes in the Caribbean. Why I'm calling this the drug boat war crime hoax of 2025. Next. Remember the Russiagate hoax, where the liberal media and the Democrats tried to convince you that Donald Trump was a Russian plant? Of course, it was all made up. It was just there to assuage the bruised egos of the elites whose candidate lost and to incept the idea that Trump was an illegitimate president so that they could undermine his agenda. Well, now they have a new hoax, the drug boat war crime hoax of 2025. And like Russiagate, it's built on a combination of fake news, fake outrage, and the desire to undermine the president's America First agenda. It started with a Washington Post article claiming, based on a single unnamed source, that in the lead up to bombing a drug boat from Venezuela, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth gave the order to kill everybody. When a first strike on the boat left 2 survivors clinging to the smoldering wreck, as the Washington Post put it, a second strike was ordered, quote, to comply with Hegseth's orders. Now, this would amount to a war crime. Survivors of an attack who are shipwrecked, helpless, and clearly incapacitated cannot be executed. What ensued from the report was immediate bipartisan condemnation of the attack.
Even if you accept their legal theory, that it is a war crime.
Going after survivors in the water, that is clearly not lawful.
I'm very, very concerned about an order that would say kill them all, kill them.
If it was as if the article said, that is a violation of the law of war. When people want to surrender, you don't kill them.
But as it turns out, the story wasn't true at all. As the New York Times reported a few days later, Hegseth ordered a strike that would kill the people on the boat and destroy the vessel and its cargo of drugs. But Hegseth did not specifically order a second strike in response to surveillance footage showing that at least 2 people on the boat had survived the first blast. A contingency plan was discussed in the case of survivors, the Times reported. The military would attempt to rescue survivors who appeared to be helpless, shipwrecked, and out of what the administration considered to be the fight. But it would try again to kill them if they took a hostile action, like communicating with cartel members. And that is what happened, according to Senator Tom Cotton, who saw the footage of the strikes.
They were not distressed. One guy took his T-shirt off like he was sunbathing. They were trying to get the boat back up and to continue their mission of spreading these drugs all across America.
This is quite a different story than the war crime fib we were initially fed. These narco-terrorists weren't clinging to a smoldering wreck. They were drug dealers trying to save the very target of the strike, meaning they were still very much in the fight. Of course, to the left, the target was never legitimate to begin with. To the Democrats and their sympathetic media, you're not allowed to stop chemical weapons from killing your children. You're supposed to politely ask them not to come. And if they do, you're supposed to politely put them on trial, with a taxpayer-funded lawyer, of course. They are wrong. The Secretary of State has the right to determine who is a terrorist. He answers to the executive branch. The DOJ wrote a legal opinion authorizing the strikes, and many, many JAG officials were in the room when the strikes took place. They did everything by the book. The drug boat war crime hoax is just another attempt to undermine the president's Article 2 powers, which were bestowed upon him by the founding fathers. Coming up, Trump is doubling down on calling out the fraud scandal in Minnesota, while the left is calling his words racist. I will break it all down. We opened the show discussing a massive fraud scandal coming out of Minnesota's Somali community and the president's commentary surrounding it. Liberal media has sought to portray President Trump's comments as racist, much as they did when he talked about Haitians eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
Like his comments about Somali fraudsters, those comments elicited accusations of racism from the media. And like with the Somali fraudsters, there was an intentional conflation of race with citizenship. Here to discuss is Republican strategist Malik Abdul. Malik, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So do you agree with me that the media does this kind of conflation intentionally when the president is talking about groups of immigrants whose behavior he doesn't approve of? It tries to turn this into a conversation about race.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that is done regularly, not just with Donald Trump, but with Republicans in general. That typically is the label that is placed whenever there is any sort of criticism. Now, I do agree. Now, I don't think that the comments that Donald Trump made, well, first of all, it wasn't true about Haitians eating dogs and cats, but I don't think that that was necessarily racist. And I don't, even in this case, I think that Donald Trump, you know, it's built in the cake that Donald Trump probably will say a bit of inappropriate things. And so I don't think that he should be calling really anyone garbage, but especially members of the Somali community. But that is actually a much larger conversation. You know, I went down the rabbit hole with this fraud scandal, and it's not just this $1 billion in Minnesota. If you go back and look at the AP report, I think back in 2023, their analysis is that as far as COVID funds, there were about $280 billion worth of fraudulence in the COVID, in issuing out the COVID funds. That was $280 billion. Yes, $1 billion is really significant, but the $280 billion, and I think that's more so not about Somalis or not about immigrants, it is about government oversight. And many Republicans, before the first tranche of money was issued out in 2020 under the first Donald Trump administration, many Republicans had questions about how, you know, what were the guardrails around that sort of money, because we ended up issuing out, I think, about $4 trillion. And we really still to this day don't know how all of that money was spent.
And what's so amazing is that when the fraudsters were almost investigated by the Department of Education, they literally threatened to call them racist if they didn't allow these fraudulent programs to persist. They used that sort of woke logic that terrifies white progressives in order to keep stealing.
Yeah, and this is something, again, that is done over and over again. It is not just with the Somali community. You think of and I would say that the Democratic Party, just over the years, the reason that they've been one of the reasons they've been so successful in really garnering a large portion of the minority vote is because they play these sort of racial politics. So again, any criticism for any reason is labeled as racism or xenophobia or things like that. And these are things that has just been done over the years. And I know that people put a lot of that attention on Donald Trump, but I just know anyone who's followed our politics over the years has to admit that this sort of narrative about Republicans being anything, you know, pick your poison when it comes to what you want to name them. This narrative has been the case for years now, and it's time for something to be done about it.
So what should be done? I mean, how can people on the right convince minorities that this narrative is a myth?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump can't be going around calling people garbage. I do think that there is some responsibility that. Yeah, I do think that there is some responsibility that Donald Trump has, but I was going back to look at what Donald Trump did. This was a video when he caught COVID. He was in the hospital back in 2020, and he invited Candace Owens, you know, not to bring her name up, but he invited Candace Owens' Blexit group to the White House, and he started talking about, this is when Donald Trump actually released his Platinum Plan. And it wasn't anything specific to Black people or Hispanic people, but it was how they could benefit from being a part of his administration. So that was around entrepreneurship, business development, education. Even in that speech, and I heard you talk, you know, you were going to talk about it, but Donald Trump was talking about protecting pre-existing conditions. And when you think of the healthcare debate that's happening now, Donald Trump has always been a bit to the left of the Republican Party on those type of issues. So I think that populism, the same populism that drew me to the Republican Party and really in support of Donald Trump back in 2016, Republicans have to get back to that. It can't just be the wedge issues that I think that we've kind of focused far too much on the wedge issues. You have to focus on not just the, the issues that bring us together, but the dollars and cents, because the same economic anxiety that elected Donald Trump in 2024, you can best believe that will be on the ballot in November of next year.
I think that is such an important point because we know from polling minority communities tend to be more conservative socially, certainly than the median progressive politician. And what happened in 2024 was because President Trump represented, in their view, their best shot at an economic revival, they were free to vote both on their economic interests and on their more cultural issues. He got a record 25% of black men. He got the majority of Hispanic men, 46% of Hispanics overall. But of course, now he's really faltering on this. You know, he calls it affordability. You know, he seems to think that this is, well, he called it a hoax. Let's have that. Here's the president talking about this exact issue.
The word affordability is a con job by the Democrats.
It is absurd that Democrats talk about an affordability crisis that they created.
The word affordability is a Democrat scam.
Not a winning message here. So what would you advise the president to do to win back support on this issue?
Stop. He's not going to listen to me. You know, I'm probably on the outs with the White House anyway. But I will say, you know, as someone who prosecuted the case against Joe Biden, not just ignoring the issue of immigration, but also the economy, it's almost a bit of tone deafness. You know, I'm old enough to remember George Bush and, the fundamentals of the economy are strong. Yeah.
No one wants to hear that.
The fundamental. No one wants to hear that when you may be, and I know that there's, the gas prices seem to be down or whatever. People vote according to how they feel, not according to what the macroeconomics are. Donald Trump is not going to stop this. This is just Donald Trump. He's going to do this. But I do think that the people around Donald Trump, it's okay. You can actually tap into the sentiments, the same sentiments that we were talking about last year. You can't, when people are saying, and polls are the only measure at this point that we have, when polls are saying that the economy is like the top issue for voters, you can't say, well, it shouldn't be because you're doing fine. That is what Joe Biden did, and it's part of the reason why he and Kamala Harris are not the president now.
Yeah, on the other hand, you do have something like record Black Friday spending. I mean, there are indicators that Americans do know that we're not in like a 2008 style recession. There are things that the president has been doing that are going to have long-term impact, I believe, in a really big way. But until like your neighbor gets a job at one of those AI factories that was built with the trillions of dollars that was brought by the Saudis, you're still going to be kind of annoyed. Why is he traveling around the world and not making things better at home?
Yep, and it is that anxiety. Again, the word of the day is really anxiety, how people feel about these actual policies. And even when it comes to immigration, for years now, across the globe, there have been protests in regards to these anti-immigration protests, where even places like Ireland, where that became an asylum for many immigrants, people were concerned that, well, wait a minute, you seem to be taking much more care of the immigrants than the people in our own country. We saw it in New York, where they gave it seemed to be what preferences to immigrants as far as housing. Same thing in Chicago. People actually feel this and they see this. And so I really think that the administration needs to hone in on an economic agenda. Yes, foreign policy is important. You have to hone in on those kitchen table issues. That's going to drive people to the polls.
Malik Abdul, God bless and protect you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations again for the show.
Thank you so much. Actor Richard Gere is not mincing words when it comes to President Trump's immigration policy. That's next. We began with what we learned about America this week, and we end with what we're looking forward to next week. Friends, we've let Richard Gere down. The actor, who's worth an estimated $120 million and lives in Spain, has decided it is his job to lecture us about who we should let into our country. Quote, "This is a small planet. We have to work together and live together, and we can do that. The bad guys exploit the illusion of differences," says Gere. "Do you really think these refugees and immigrants are different than us?" Oh, Richard Gere, the planet is small, you say. How big is the property you live on? How many refugees are you sharing it with? How many migrants are you competing with for a job to feed your family? How many are you competing with for a roof over your head? This moral preening from an unbelievably wealthy retiree who pays nothing for the vanity morals he espouses, from a different country, no less, is the hallmark of the Democratic Party right now. The Democrats are now the party of the wealthy and the overeducated, people with the luxury to put their material needs second to their vanity because they are so wealthy. For decades, multimillionaires sneered at the working class, using accusations of racism to shame the American people for refusing to co-sign their own disinheritance to benefit the global indigent. Sorry, Richard, that era is over. To state it plainly, those refugees are different from us in the most crucial way. They aren't Americans, and it's Americans who get to decide who becomes one of us. Thank you all so much for joining me today. It was an honor to have you with us. May God bless and protect you and the United States of America.